A police officer and his loyal German shepherd walked through the snow-covered parking lot of St. Gabriel's Hospital in Asheville, North Carolina. The night was quiet until the dog froze, ears pricked, staring at a faint light flickering in one of the upper windows. Inside that room lay the officer's father, a retired veteran who had been in a coma for months. But something about that light didn't feel right. The dog growled low, his instincts cutting through the silence like a blade. What they were about to uncover inside those sterile walls would expose a darkness far deeper than any winter night, and a secret that could destroy everything they loved. What happened next would restore your faith in family, loyalty, and the miracles that still walk among us on four paws. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. And if you believe that love and courage can still defeat corruption, hit that subscribe button, because this story might just change how you see the world. The first snow had begun to fall over Asheville, North Carolina, blanketing the Blue Ridge foothills in a hush that made even the city's sirens sound distant. Outside St. Gabriel's Hospital, the air carried the clean, metallic bite of winter, mixing with the faint hum of fluorescent lights that never slept. Officer Ethan Walker, 38 years old, walked through the snow-covered parking lot, his heavy boots crunching over the ice. Broad-shouldered and calm-faced, Ethan had the build of a man who once lifted more weight than grief, but his gray-blue eyes hinted that grief had won over time. His uniform, a dark navy police jacket with the Asheville badge gleaming under the lights, fit him as naturally as the authority in his voice. Yet tonight, the authority felt hollow. He was not here as a cop. He was here as a son. Trailing beside him was his partner and oldest friend, Ranger, a 5-year-old German shepherd with black and tan fur and a faint scar slashing one ear, a reminder of a past raid gone wrong. Ranger's paws left perfect prints in the thin snow, his breath visible in small clouds. He wasn't just a dog, he was the mirror of Ethan's instincts, always alert, always protective, carrying that unspoken intelligence only seen in those who've seen too much. Beside Ethan skipped Mia Walker, his 8-year-old daughter, wrapped in a bright red wool coat that stood out against the white world around her. The coat was torn slightly at the sleeve and dirt-stained at the hem, a memento of her refusal to part with her favorite thing. Her golden curls peeked out from beneath a wool hat, framing a face that was too curious for her age. She was all light and laughter on most days, but tonight she was unusually quiet. "Is Grandpa going to wake up this time, Daddy?" she asked softly. Ethan paused at the hospital doors, letting the automatic glass slide open with a sigh. "I hope so, sweetheart," he murmured, his voice tight. "I really hope so." The hospital smelled like antiseptic and loneliness. The floors gleamed, the lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the hum of machines blended with the echo of distant footsteps. Harold Walker, Ethan's father, had been a Navy man, stern, disciplined, the kind of father who saluted before he hugged. A stroke had taken him down 2 months ago, leaving him silent in a bed on the 4th floor. Ethan visited every night, always bringing Ranger, because somehow the dog's presence seemed to keep his father's heartbeat steady. When they reached room 412, Ethan noticed something strange. The door was half open, and the sound of clinking metal came from inside. Ranger's ears pricked instantly, a low rumble starting in his throat. Ethan frowned and pushed the door open. Inside stood a woman in light blue scrubs, tall, slender, in her early 30s, with perfectly straight blonde hair tied into a neat bun. Her skin was pale under the harsh hospital lighting, and her movements too, precise, almost mechanical. She glanced up, startled, her gray eyes calm in a way that made them unsettling. "Evening," Ethan said, his hand resting on Ranger's leash. "Didn't expect anyone else here at this hour." The woman smiled politely but thinly. "Medication change," she replied, her voice smooth, rehearsed. "New order from the attending physician." Ethan's eyes moved to the IV line. A new bag hung there, but something was off. The label was smudged, handwritten, not the printed kind he was used to seeing. His instincts flickered. "Funny," he said slowly. "Dr. Nolan didn't mention any new meds when I talked to him this morning." The woman didn't look up. "You must have missed the update, officer." Ranger growled again, low and sharp. The sound was deep enough to make the heart monitor skip a beat. Ethan felt the leash tighten in his hand. "Easy, boy." he murmured, though his gaze stayed locked on the nurse. "Mind if I check that order?" The woman's smile didn't falter, but her tone cooled a degree. "You'll have to speak to the head of pharmacy for that, sir." She capped the syringe, turned, and bent to adjust the IV tube. As she did, Ranger lunged forward slightly, barking once, loud, urgent. The woman flinched, her elbow knocking the small vial from the tray. It shattered on the floor. Ethan crouched. The liquid spread across the tile in a thin sheen. No label, no smell. Just clear like water. "What's in that?" he asked quietly. "Vitamin supplement," she said too quickly. "Unlabeled vitamins?" Ethan stood straight, his voice tightening. "That's a first." She exhaled through her nose, her composure cracking for just a heartbeat before she forced the mask back on. "Sir, if you have concerns, I can call security." "Please do," Ethan replied evenly. The lights flickered once, then again. The room plunged into darkness. Mia screamed, clutching Ethan's leg. Ranger barked wildly, teeth flashing in the dim emergency glow. The hum of machines faltered, and the steady beep of Harold's heart monitor slowed. Ethan reached for his flashlight, its narrow beam cutting through the dark. The nurse was gone. "Mia, stay behind me," he ordered. He swept the light across the room. Only the empty chair, the shattered vial, and his father's motionless form met his gaze. The door to the hallway creaked softly, as if touched by a whisper. Ranger bolted toward it, barking furiously. Ethan followed, heart pounding, but the hall was empty. He turned back to his father's bedside, scanning for signs of harm. Harold's chest still rose and fell, faint but steady. Ethan exhaled shakily. "She's gone," he said under his breath. "Just vanished." Mia clung to his coat sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling. "Why was Ranger barking like that? Did he see something bad?" Ethan knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Her red coat glowed softly under the backup lights, like a flare in a sea of gray. "Sometimes dogs see things we can't, sweetheart," he said. "They just know." Ranger stood rigid, staring toward the doorway, muscles tense beneath his fur. The flicker of emergency lights reflected in his amber eyes, turning them almost human in their intensity. A nurse from another wing, Sarah Lynn, a kind-faced woman in her late 40s with tired eyes and curly dark hair, hurried down the hall. She was shorter than Ethan, a little round at the shoulders, the kind of woman who'd seen too much suffering, but still smiled for her patients. "Officer Walker? What's going on?" she asked. "Power surge," Ethan said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "We had a nurse in here, tall, blonde, early 30s, Lydia maybe. She was changing the IV. You know her?" Sarah blinked. "There's no Lydia Moore on the night staff," she said slowly. "We don't even have anyone on rotation who fits that description tonight." The words hit Ethan like a drop in temperature. He looked back into the room. His father lay still, the monitors slowly returning to rhythm. Everything was back to normal, except for the pool of liquid glinting faintly on the floor. Sarah stepped closer, frowning. "What is that?" "Something she dropped," Ethan murmured. "I'll have it checked." He pulled a small evidence pouch from his jacket, an old habit, and scooped up a sample with a gauze pad. As he sealed the bag, the hallway lights flickered again, dimming to a dull amber. A distant mechanical hum filled the corridor, the old elevator grinding to life at the far end. Ethan turned his head. A faint ding echoed through the silence. Sarah frowned. "Maintenance again? That thing hasn't worked all week." Ethan took a cautious step forward, Ranger padding beside him. The elevator doors opened with a sluggish sigh. Inside sat a single stainless steel medical cart. A syringe rolled slowly across its tray, clinking against the edge before settling. The plunger was smeared with something dark. Ethan's grip on Ranger's leash tightened. The dog growled softly, low and warning. Mia peeked from behind her father's leg, voice barely above a whisper. "Daddy? Is someone still here?" Ethan didn't answer. The snow outside the windows kept falling, muffling the world beyond the hospital walls. For the first time in his career, he wished it could snow hard enough to cover the truth. Morning came pale and brittle over Asheville. The snow from the night before had crusted into thin glassy layers that cracked beneath boots and tires, and a gray fog hung over the Blue Ridge ridges like a reluctant ghost. Officer Ethan Walker pulled into the St. Gabriel's Hospital lot again, the same one where his breath had frosted in the dark just hours before. But daylight didn't make the place feel safer. It only revealed how sterile it truly was. The building stood silent against the mountains, its rows of windows staring blankly like the eyes of something that never slept. Inside, the hospital lobby was half lit. Nurses moved through the corridors with tired, automatic smiles, the kind that didn't reach their eyes. Ethan's boots squeaked faintly on the polished floor as he made his way to the physician's wing. He was greeted by Dr. Nolan Carter, the man who had been overseeing his father's care. Nolan was in his early 40s, tall and lean, with dark brown hair flecked at the temples and eyes that looked perpetually burdened. He wore a simple white lab coat over a pale blue shirt, the tie loosened just enough to betray sleepless nights. Once a promising medical researcher, Nolan had chosen hospital work after losing his younger brother to a malpractice scandal years ago, something that had carved both guilt and defiance into his nature. He was one of the few in St. Gabriel's that Ethan trusted. "Morning, Ethan," Nolan greeted, voice low but steady. "I got your message. You said there was an incident last night?" Ethan nodded, setting his coffee aside. "A nurse, blonde, early 30s, claimed to be changing my father's IV. The name tag said Lydia Moore. She disappeared when the power cut. You have anyone by that name here?" Nolan's brows drew together. "Lydia Moore?" He turned to his computer, fingers tapping rapidly. "Give me a second." The database flickered on the monitor. No record of her. No Lydia, no Moore, nothing even close. "Are you sure you read that right?" "She had an ID badge," Ethan said, "and she knew my father's case file number." Nolan's eyes narrowed. "That's not something you could guess." He clicked into Harold's file, but after a few seconds, the color drained from his face. "Wait, this can't be right." Ethan leaned closer. The screen was blank. No medications, no charts, no patient history. Just an empty folder. "His entire file's been deleted," Nolan muttered, his voice tight. "Even the backups, someone scrubbed it clean." Ethan's stomach nodded. "When's the last recorded access?" Nolan pulled up the logs. 2:47 a.m., he said. Someone logged in from the basement terminal, the one connected to the hospital's core server. Ethan frowned. "That's restricted access, isn't it?" "It should be," Nolan replied grimly. "But whoever did this used an internal code, something only IT staff or administrators would have." Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed the station, requesting remote access to the hospital's surveillance system under police authority. He sat beside Nolan as the security feeds flickered to life. The footage showed the empty corridors from 2:30 to 3:01 a.m., except for one gap, 10 minutes of static. "The cameras went dark," Ethan muttered. 10 minutes, just enough to make something disappear. Nolan rubbed his temples. "This is bigger than a rogue nurse." "Yeah," Ethan said. "And last night, I saw something else." He reached into his pocket, producing the evidence pouch containing the clear liquid from the shattered vial. "Whatever this is, it wasn't vitamins." Before Nolan could respond, the door creaked open. A young man in a navy hoodie and thick glasses stepped in, holding a laptop. He couldn't have been older than 24. Excuse me, Dr. Carter? You called about the server logs?" Ethan turned. The kid looked nervous, shoulders hunched as if he was always expecting trouble. His name tag read Kyle Benton. His hands trembled slightly as he set the laptop down, fingers tapping with the twitchy energy of someone more comfortable with machines than people. "Yeah, Kyle," Nolan said. "Can you confirm who accessed the basement system last night?" Kyle nodded, typing rapidly. "There was a manual override logged at 2:47 a.m., he said, pushing his glasses up. "That's not normal. It bypassed the usual password route. Whoever did it used a portable drive with admin clearance." Ethan leaned over. "You said you manage those terminals, right?" Kyle hesitated. "Yeah, I do, but I wasn't here. I left around 11 p.m. after running maintenance on the cooling system." "Did you see anyone down there?" Ethan pressed. Kyle swallowed hard. His eyes flickered toward the door, as if he wanted to leave. "I did, actually. Around midnight I went back to grab my jacket. I saw a woman, blonde hair, blue scrubs. She was with a man in a black coat. He had some kind of hospital pass, but it wasn't our design. He wore a pin, a silver S inside a circle. It looked expensive. Ethan's eyes snapped to Nolan's. Silver S. Did you hear that? Nolan's face paled. Silvercare Group. Ethan's jaw tightened. He remembered his father mentioning that name, once offhand, about a company that helped veterans transition by buying their properties and managing medical support. But Harold had called them vultures in suits. They're supposed to be a charity, Ethan said. Nolan scoffed. Charities don't erase patient records at 2:47 a.m. Ethan turned back to Kyle. You didn't see their faces clearly? Kyle shook his head. I wish I hadn't seen anything. The man looked right at me when the elevator doors closed, like he was daring me to say something. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing telling us. Don't talk to anyone else about this, understood? Kyle nodded quickly and left, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to follow. Nolan sighed. I'll start a new file for your father. Everything we know from memory, just in case. Ethan nodded. Do that. I'll dig into Silvercare. That afternoon, the snow returned. The flakes drifted silently over the Walker home, covering the backyard in white. Inside, Mia sat at the kitchen table, sketching in her notebook. Her drawings were always vivid. Houses, trees, people, and, most often, Ranger, who now slept curled near the back door. She looked up as a scraping sound caught her ear. Ranger had gotten up and was pawing furiously at the frozen earth by the old oak. Ranger, she called softly, pulling on her red coat. What is it? The dog barked once and continued digging, claws scraping against something soft and buried. Mia knelt beside him. The snow gave way to a small cloth pouch, dark with dirt and sealed by a string. On the front was a faint silver S stitched in thread that shimmered under the gray sky. She untied it carefully, revealing a plastic ID card and a folded document inside. The card showed a woman's face, sharp, blonde, smiling faintly. Lydia Moore, St. Gabriel's Hospital. Mia frowned, recognizing the woman from her father's story the night before. The folded paper beneath was harder to understand. It had her grandfather's name typed in neat letters and words she couldn't read. Estate authorization. Ranger sniffed the air and whined, tail low. It's okay, Mia whispered, patting his head. We'll show Daddy. She tucked the pouch into her coat pocket and ran back inside. By evening, Ethan returned home, exhaustion etched deep under his eyes. Mia ran to him immediately, her red coat flaring like a signal flare. Daddy, look what Ranger found. She held out the pouch. Ethan's blood ran cold when he saw the silver symbol. He unfolded the documents on the table. His father's signature, his actual signature, was at the bottom of a printed authorization transferring property ownership to Silvercare Group. The date was recent, 2 weeks after Harold had fallen into a coma. This can't be real, Ethan muttered. He couldn't have signed this. Mia's eyes were wide. Did someone make Grandpa sign it when he was sick? Ethan didn't answer. The thought clawed at him. He turned toward the window, watching the snow fall heavier now, muffling the world in white. He felt Ranger brush against his leg, the dog's quiet presence grounding him. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. He opened the message. Stop digging, Officer Walker. You don't want your daughter to be next. For a long moment, Ethan didn't move. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, and Ranger lifted his head, growling low. The storm had only begun. The snow had turned into sleet by the following night, hissing softly against the windows of the Walker home. The roads were half frozen, and the entire city of Asheville seemed to hold its breath beneath the low gray sky. Ethan Walker hadn't slept. The anonymous text still glowed in his mind like a wound. Stop digging if you want your daughter safe. Every instinct in him screamed to pull back, to protect Mia and forget everything. But that wasn't who he was. Not after what he'd seen in war, not after what Silvercare had done to his father. He knew that fear was exactly what they wanted. By morning, Ethan was back at St. Gabriel's Hospital, coat dusted with frozen rain, a quiet fury in his stride. He found Dr. Nolan Carter waiting by the nurse's station, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression of a man about to break rules for the right reason. The harsh hospital lights bleached his already pale face, and the dark circles under his eyes were deep enough to tell their own story. You got my message? Nolan asked quietly. Ethan nodded. Let's do it. They moved quickly through the corridors, avoiding the cameras. In room 412, Harold Walker lay as still as he had for weeks, his chest rising in fragile rhythm. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor filled the room. Nolan opened a kit and slipped on gloves, his movements precise. "I'll draw a small sample. No one will notice." Ethan stood guard at the door, his hand resting on his holstered gun. He wasn't expecting trouble, but hospitals had a way of hiding ghosts in plain sight. Ranger sat beside the bed, head on his paws, amber eyes following every sound. Nolan filled a vial with blood, sealing it and marking it with only the initials HW. They left through the back stairwell. "I'll send it to a friend at the toxicology lab," Nolan said, as they stepped out into the frozen air of the loading bay. "Off the record, he owes me." "Anyone you trust?" Ethan asked. Nolan gave a small, humorless laugh. "I used to. But in this city, trust is a dying language." That evening, while Ethan was still combing through hospital records, Mia was home with Ranger. The warm light of the living room flickered against the frosted windows. She had been drawing again, this time, a picture of her father standing with Ranger outside the hospital, the moon shining above them. Her little hands moved carefully, the crayons leaving smudges of red and blue across the page. Then came the sound, a faint rattle at the back door. She froze, listening. Ranger's ears perked, his body tense in an instant. The scratching grew louder, metal against metal. Someone was trying the lock. "Ranger?" she whispered. The dog was already moving. His claws clicked once on the tile, then he lunged toward the door, barking with a fury that shook the walls. A shadow outside stumbled back, the sound of boots crunching in the snow. The figure ran. Ranger hit. The door hard, snarling, his breath fogging against the glass. Mia ran to grab her father's old flashlight from the table and aimed it through the window, catching a glimpse of a dark coat vanishing behind the fence. Her heart thudded. On the ground near the porch lay something, a small folded paper, half buried in snow. When Ethan came home half an hour later, sirens still distant from another call, Mia ran into his arms before he could even take off his coat. "Daddy! Someone was at the door! Ranger scared him away." Ethan's blood went cold. "What do you mean someone was here?" She pointed toward the back porch. "He dropped this." Ethan picked up the damp paper. The ink was smeared, but the words were still legible. "Patient transfer order. Harold Walker, Silvercare Hospice, December 3rd. He stared at it, jaw tightening. "That's tomorrow," he whispered. "They're moving him." By midnight, the hospital was silent again. The kind of silence that hums beneath fluorescent lights. Ethan returned, this time dressed in plain clothes, with his badge clipped to his belt under his coat. Nolan met him near the stairwell, carrying a small duffel. "You sure about this?" Nolan asked. "If they try to move him, I want proof," Ethan replied. He pulled a small black case from his pocket, a micro camera no bigger than a coin. "I'll plant this in the heart monitor housing. It's motion triggered," Nolan nodded. "Just be careful, Ethan. If Silvercare is behind this, they've got people everywhere." "Let them come," Ethan said. "I'm done playing defense." In room 412, Ethan worked quietly. He lifted the back panel of the monitor, slipped the camera inside, and sealed it again. Ranger lay near the foot of the bed, perfectly still but watchful, his ears twitching with every faint sound. Nolan double-checked Harold's vitals before leaving, murmuring, "He's stable. For now." Hours passed. The digital clock above the door clicked past 11:47 p.m. The hospital had fallen into that eerie rhythm between shifts, where footsteps were rare and time stretched thin. Ranger stirred, a low growl rolling from his chest. Ethan looked up from the chair where he had been half dozing. "What is it, boy?" The dog's gaze fixed on the door. The handle turned slowly. The door opened. She stepped in like a ghost, the same blonde woman in blue scrubs, her expression cold and composed. Lydia Moore. Her movements were calm, deliberate, the way one might approach prey that had forgotten how to run. Behind her came a man Ethan hadn't seen before. He was tall, well-dressed, his silver hair neatly combed back, his posture radiating authority. His tailored black coat glimmered faintly under the dim light. His face was lined, but not with age, with control. This was Grant Hale, CEO of Silvercare Group. His eyes were ice gray, empty of warmth. "Good evening, Officer Walker," he said, smoothly, his voice carrying the polite venom of a man accustomed to boardrooms and threats disguised as compliments. "I wish this meeting were under better circumstances." Ethan didn't move, but his hand hovered near his belt. "You're trespassing." Hale smiled faintly. "You could say the same of yourself. You see, your father is under our care now. Legally speaking, this facility no longer has jurisdiction." Lydia moved to the bedside, her gloved hands opening a small case. Inside gleamed a clear syringe, filled with colorless liquid. "This won't take long," she murmured. Ethan's muscles tensed. "Step away from him." Lydia ignored him. The needle caught the light as she lifted it. Ranger's growl deepened into a snarl. The instant she reached for Harold's arm, the dog launched himself forward, knocking her off balance. The syringe clattered across the floor. She screamed, trying to push him off, but Ranger's jaws locked onto her sleeve. Hale pulled a pistol from inside his coat, aiming at the dog. Ethan moved before he thought. The gun went off. Glass shattered behind him. In 2 strides, he tackled Hale, driving him against the wall. The pistol skidded away, landing under the bed. Lydia screamed again as Ranger ripped free the fabric of her uniform, bearing a pale scar across her wrist, the same shape as the silver S symbol. Ethan pressed his forearm against Hale's chest, his voice low and furious. "You try to poison my father and call it care?" Hale just laughed softly. "You really think this is about one man, Officer Walker? Silver Care is the tip of an empire. What you've seen tonight," he smiled coldly, "is the surface of the sea." Before Ethan could respond, the lights flickered once, twice, and died. The monitors went black. The humming machines fell silent. The emergency lights failed to come on. Darkness swallowed the room. From somewhere down the corridor came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and too heavy to be either Lydia or Hale. Ranger's growl echoed through the dark like thunder under his breath. Ethan reached for his flashlight, but it refused to click on. And then came a voice, low and unfamiliar, from just beyond the doorway. "You shouldn't have come back here, officer." The sound of metal scraping the floor followed, a chair being dragged. Hale stiffened. "That's not one of mine," he whispered. Ranger barked once, the sound exploding in the dark. Then, silence. The generator kicked in with a violent hum, flooding the corridors of St. Gabriel's Hospital with trembling white light. The world that had been devoured by darkness seconds ago returned in fragments, flickering bulbs, the echo of alarms, and the sharp, rhythmic barking of Ranger. Lydia Moore was gone, vanished like a shadow dissolving into the sterile air. Grant Hale, pale and bleeding from a cut across his temple, lay restrained on the cold tile. His once immaculate black coat was torn, his expression twisted with fury and disbelief. Ethan pressed his knee against Hale's chest, keeping him pinned as Dr. Nolan Carter rushed in, his face a mixture of horror and relief. "What happened?" he demanded. "She ran," Ethan said. "And he gestured at Hale, "decided to play God in my father's room." Hale's laugh was low and bitter. "You think you've won something, Officer Walker? You just turned on the lights in a room full of monsters." "Then it's time they saw me," Ethan growled. He snapped handcuffs around Hale's wrists just as 2 federal agents entered, responding to Nolan's emergency call. One of them, Agent Cassandra Holt, was a compact woman in her mid-30s with raven black hair cut into a blunt bob and a voice that carried both precision and exhaustion. Her career had been built on rooting out medical corruption. She'd seen too many hospitals bleed patients dry for profit. "Get him to holding," she ordered, "and bag everything in this room, every vial, every syringe, every scrap of paper." Nolan retrieved the clear syringe Lydia had dropped and slipped it carefully into an evidence bag. "This is the stuff," he said. "If we can trace it, we'll have more than testimony. We'll have murder weapons." By dawn, Hale was in custody, and the hospital's security office was swarming with investigators. But victory came with a cost. When Ethan finally stepped outside into the icy morning, he could already see the news vans lining the street. Reporters hounded him with questions. By noon, the headlines appeared online. "Police officer conducts unauthorized operation inside hospital. Patient endangered during rogue investigation." Mia was at home, sitting cross-legged on the floor in her red coat, clutching Ranger's fur as she stared at the television. The anchor's voice was sharp, clinical. Local officer Ethan Walker is under internal review for violating hospital protocols during an ongoing investigation. She didn't understand all the words, but she saw the photo. Her father, exhausted, walking out of St. Gabriel's under flashing lights. "They're lying," she whispered, eyes filling. Ranger licked her hand softly as if agreeing. When Ethan arrived home that evening, his face was pale, his jaw tight. "They've turned it around on you," Nolan said over the phone. "Public opinion's shifting fast." Ethan leaned against the counter, staring at the family photo of him, Mia and Harold at a summer fair years ago. "They're trying to isolate me," he muttered. "Typical tactic. Discredit the witness, bury the truth. But truth has a way of attracting allies." That night, Ethan met Nolan in a quiet cafe near the downtown courthouse. The place was nearly empty except for a young woman sitting in the corner, typing furiously on a laptop. Her short auburn hair framed a face marked by sleepless eyes and sharp determination. Harper Lane, 28, investigative journalist for the Asheville Ledger. She had a reputation for chasing stories that scared bigger outlets away, and for never backing down even after being sued twice by corporate lawyers. When Ethan and Nolan approached, she looked up, wary but curious. "You're the cop from the hospital video," she said, "the one everyone's calling reckless." "Depends who you ask," Ethan replied, sliding into the seat opposite her. Harper's gaze flicked between them. "Dr. Carter, right? You emailed me, said you had something Silvercare wouldn't want public." Nolan handed her a flash drive. Lab results, financial trails, internal memos, all tying Silvercare to hospital acquisitions across 3 states. They're not saving veterans, they're bleeding them for property. Harper plugged in the drive, her expression tightening as she scrolled through the files. "Holy hell," she breathed. "This isn't just Asheville. They've bought into 27 medical facilities. Every one of them reports abnormally high death rates in patients over 65. Ethan leaned forward. "And they falsified death certificates. I've got proof. At least 40 cases." Harper's journalistic instincts ignited. "Then we can expose this. But if I publish raw data, they'll claim forgery. We need something undeniable. Video, live evidence, something no one can spin." Ethan's eyes met Nolan's. "Then we give it to them." The plan came together over 2 days. Nolan would officially authorize Harold Walker's transfer to a Silvercare hospice. Using the forged paperwork the criminals themselves had been circulating, the federal agents, Holt among them, would remain undercover as transport staff, ready to move in when the imposters arrived. Harper would stream the entire operation in real time under a private encrypted link, ensuring that if anything went wrong, the footage would leak automatically. Meanwhile, Mia was stationed in the hospital's security room, watching over the live feeds. Her father had been hesitant, but she had begged to help. "I can do it," she'd said. "Ranger will be with me." Her eyes wide with determination, reminded Ethan too much of his late wife, fearless even when afraid. By nightfall, the trap was set. The corridors were eerily quiet, as if the hospital itself knew it was about to witness something it would never forget. At 10:12 p.m., 2 men entered through the side door. Both wore gray uniforms marked with the Silvercare insignia. They carried metal cases and a stack of papers. On the surface, they looked professional, but Ranger had already sensed what the eye couldn't see. His ears twitched, his body stiffened. In the security room, Mia leaned closer to the screen. "Daddy," she whispered into the radio. "They're here." Ethan's reply was calm. "Keep the door locked. Don't move." The men entered Harold's room, whispering to each other. One, tall and thin, with a nervous twitch in his left eye, adjusted the IV line. The other, heavier, checked his clipboard. "Transfer authorization confirmed," he said softly. "Now," Ethan murmured. Ranger burst from the shadows with a thunderous bark, knocking the clipboard from the man's hands. The heavy one stumbled back, shouting. The sound echoed down the hall. The signal. Within seconds, the door burst open, and agents flooded in, weapons drawn. "Federal investigation!" Holt shouted. "Drop it!" The men froze. One reached for his pocket. Too late. Ethan slammed him against the wall. The tall one tried to run, but Nolan caught his coat, ripping it open, revealing an earpiece and hidden transmitter. Harper's voice came through Ethan's radio, trembling with adrenaline. "We're live. Every second's being recorded." The hallway filled with chaos. the suspects shouting, agents yelling, Ranger barking. When the dust settled, 2 men were cuffed and evidence cases lay open on the floor. Inside were medical records, names, dates, addresses. Over 40 files of patients listed as deceased, their assets quietly funneled into shell corporations. Nolan exhaled. They were preparing another batch. Ethan looked at the monitors showing Mia's anxious face. Not anymore. An hour later, in Harper's apartment, the lights from her multiple monitors painted the walls in blue glow. The story was already uploading to her secure cloud, the footage from Ethan's body cam streaming through. She leaned back, exhausted but victorious. For the first time, it felt like the truth had a pulse. Then her phone buzzed. A new message appeared, untraceable. "You shouldn't broadcast this. They're already at his house." Her eyes widened. She turned toward the window. Outside, parked under the halo of a streetlight, sat a black SUV, engine idling. She grabbed her coat and whispered, "Ethan!" But the call went straight to voicemail. The headlights flared once, like eyes opening. The night that had once trembled with fear gave way to silence, and silence slowly gave birth to light. By the time the first sun rays touched the frosted peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the house on Willow Creek stood empty. The furniture, the photographs, even the warmth of daily laughter, all gone. But it wasn't abandonment, it was strategy. For the first time in weeks, Ethan Walker had moved his family to safety. The FBI field office outside Asheville wasn't built for comfort. The concrete walls hummed with the faint vibration of generators, and the fluorescent lights never dimmed. Yet for Ethan, it was sanctuary. Inside a small, protected unit, Mia sat on a metal bench with her sketchbook, drawing Ranger in his new collar, a simple leather strap with a gold tag etched K9 Courage. Her red wool coat hung neatly beside her, still faintly dusted with the snow of a night that had nearly stolen everything. Ranger, calm and alert as ever, lay beside her feet. His coat gleamed in the sterile light, black and tan fur still damp from the morning patrol. Every sound made his ears flick, but his eyes were soft whenever they turned toward Mia. It was as if he understood he was her guardian, not by command, but by choice. Across the room, Ethan stood beside Agent Cassandra Holt, reviewing the footage that Harper Lane had broadcast live. On one screen, Grant Hale's arrest played in slow motion, the moment when years of corruption unraveled under one camera's gaze. On another, Lydia Moore's medical authorization records scrolled endlessly, each digital signature linking SilverCare to death certificates that should never have existed. "Your father's case opened the door," Holt said quietly. "But what's behind it? It's going to shake the system. Hospitals across the country are under review. You exposed something no one wanted to see." Ethan's face was tired, lined with days of no sleep, but his gray-blue eyes were steady. "We just told the truth," he said. "My dad taught me that's all a man can do." At that moment, Harper entered the room. She looked different now, her auburn hair tied back, eyes shadowed but fierce. The adrenaline of her scoop had passed, leaving a woman who'd seen the cost of truth. "It's everywhere," she said, holding up her tablet. "National outlets picked it up overnight. SilverCare's stock collapsed. The DOJ just launched a full-scale investigation." Nolan, who had just walked in with fresh coffee, set the cups on the table. "You did it, Ethan," he said with a small smile. "You saved your father, and a lot of other people's fathers, too." Ethan exhaled, shoulders finally dropping. "We did it," he corrected. A week later, Harold Walker opened his eyes. The morning sunlight spilled through the blinds of room 412, painting the hospital walls in gold. Machines hummed softly, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Ethan was there, sitting by the bed, fingers clasped tightly around his father's hand. Harold, once so formidable, looked frail but alive. His face was pale, his lips dry. Yet when he spoke, his voice carried that unmistakable authority of a man who had commanded seas and storms. "Son," he rasped, "you did what I couldn't finish. You protected those who couldn't protect themselves." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "You taught me how." Harold's gaze shifted toward the corner of the room where Ranger sat, head high, tail wagging once. "That dog," Harold murmured. "He's got the heart of a soldier." Mia, standing beside her grandfather, smiled proudly. "He's part of our team now, Grandpa, just like you." The old man smiled faintly, tears glimmering in his weathered eyes. The day of the trial came like the clearing of a storm. The federal courthouse in Charlotte buzzed with tension as reporters crowded the marble steps. Inside, under the cold glow of chandeliers, Grant Hale sat at the defendant's table in an immaculate suit, but his arrogance had drained away. His once steady hands now trembled, and the faint bruise near his temple told the story of a man whose power had met its end. Beside him sat Lydia Moore, wrists bound, her blonde hair no longer sleek but frayed at the edges. Gone was the calm confidence she'd once worn like a mask. She refused to meet Ethan's gaze across the courtroom. When the sentence was read, life imprisonment without parole, the room fell silent. Ethan didn't celebrate. He simply placed a hand on his father's shoulder. Justice, when true, doesn't roar. It exhales. That afternoon, under a gentler sun, a ceremony was held in front of St. Gabriel's Hospital. The FBI, local law enforcement, and hospital staff gathered in the courtyard. Agent Holt stepped to the podium, her dark suit crisp, her voice steady as she spoke into the microphone. "Today, we honor courage in all its forms," she said. "The courage to speak when silence is safer, the courage to trust when fear says run, and the courage of a man, his daughter, and a loyal K-9 who reminded us that honor still breathes in this world." She gestured for Ethan to step forward. He did, uniform pressed, hat tucked under his arm. Ranger stood beside him, posture proud. The sunlight caught the gold medal hanging around the dog's neck, the K-9 Medal of Valor. Applause rippled through the crowd. Next, Mia was called. She blushed under the attention, clutching her red coat tighter as Holt pinned a small silver badge to her chest. For bravery beyond her years, and for reminding us all that heroism isn't measured by size, but by heart. The crowd cheered, and Ethan knelt beside his daughter, whispering, "You did good, sweetheart." She grinned. "We all did." Later that day, the Walker family found a quiet corner of the hospital garden. Harold, walking slowly with a cane, took each step as if savoring it. His movements were uncertain, but his spirit was unbroken. The air smelled of pine and thawing snow. Mia ran ahead, her laughter ringing like wind chimes. She packed a small snowball and tossed it toward Ranger, who caught it midair with a joyful bark. The dog bounded after her, tail slicing through the sunlight. Ethan watched them, a smile softening his usually guarded expression. The weight that had haunted him for months began to lift. "You see that, Mia?" he called out. "Even when the world's full of lies, one honest heart and one loyal dog can still change everything." Mia turned back, cheeks flushed, her golden curls catching the light. "Because we didn't give up, right, Daddy?" He smiled. "Never." Behind them, Harold's low chuckle joined the wind. For the first time in years, the 3 generations of the Walker family stood together, not as victims of circumstance, but as survivors who had faced the storm and lived to see the sunrise. As the first rays of dawn brushed the mountains, Ranger let out a long, echoing bark that rolled across the hospital grounds. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a proclamation, a sound that belonged to freedom, to justice, and to the bond that no darkness could ever break. And for Ethan Walker, that sound was the beginning of peace. In the end, the story of Officer Ethan Walker, little Mia, and the brave German Shepherd Ranger reminds us that miracles don't always arrive with thunder or angels. Sometimes they come quietly, through courage, loyalty, and love. When the night seemed longest, faith became their light. And perhaps that's how God still works in our world, not by moving mountains, but by moving hearts. Every act of honesty, every moment of compassion, every choice to stand up for what's right. Those are the small miracles that still happen every day. Ethan's courage, Mia's innocence, and Ranger's devotion are proof that when we refuse to give up, when we believe in something greater than fear, light always returns. So tonight, take a moment to thank God for the unseen blessings around you, for the loyal hearts beside you, and the strength He gives you when you feel alone. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe that God still sends His angels, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may His light guide you through every dark night.